And next, we're going to have Paul. So we will have questions and a discussion. We just want to really have an opportunity for education from each of these folks and have them
there you go.
tell you.
That's the crowd pleaser. The guy from the Humane Society. You can tell whose computer is being used.
So this is Paul, and he's going to tell us about why restaurants, cafeterias, and others are implementing higher animal welfare standards, and all about Meatless Mondays and the trends on the meat front. So here you go.
Thank you very much, Whitney. You mind putting the lights back down? Is this thing? All right, great. You guys can hear me. How many of you guys are chefs? Raise your hand. All right, well, those of you who are not raising your hand, clap your hands for those chefs around us here. We owe them a debt of gratitude for reasons that are obvious to all of us. As a speaker, I can tell you that I speak for all of us that we especially like it when our audiences are plied with alcohol before we get up to the microphone. It makes your experience of our speeches much better for you. But you're right, Whitney. I do want to talk a little bit about animal welfare standards and some of the things that are happening in the food service world with restaurants and even with large chain restaurants and so on. There are a lot of factors that people consider when they are thinking about their food. How many food miles, was it organic, and so on. But animal welfare is one of the key factors that a lot of consumers are considering. And I don't say that based on anecdotal evidence or some type of parochial interest because I work at the Humane Society of the United States. I say it because the polling is very clear. Technomic, the food industry consulting service, did their own survey. They asked restaurant patrons, what are the most important issues to you when you go to a restaurant? And you can see here, almost to the top at number 3, is animal welfare. Higher than the environment, higher than buying fair trade or buying local or buying organic, animal welfare ranked right near the top. Similarly, some of you may recognize Phil Lempert from his show Supermarket Guru on NBC's Today Show. That's his segment. Or you might read his Supermarket Guru report, the Lempert Report, in which Phil says, and I quote, there's organic, there's fair trade, but humane is the next big thing. We ask shoppers what they're looking for, and that is what they're telling us. Animal welfare is so paramount in the minds of many consumers that, in fact, the International Finance Corporation of the World Bank published recently a good practice note in which they said, in the case of animal welfare, failure to keep pace with changing consumer expectations and market opportunities could put companies and their investors at a competitive disadvantage. In other words, don't get caught being associated with animal cruelty. It seems pretty obvious, but the fact is that animal cruelty is something that is universal. Even people who don't care about how many food miles their produce came from probably are not big fans of animal abuse. So animal welfare is a key component of the sustainability in the food sustainability and agricultural sustainability movement, but there is a huge disparity. There's a big disparity, a huge gap between what consumers actually want as far as animal welfare is concerned and what animals are actually getting. In other words, the way that Americans think farm animals ought to be treated is very different from how those animals are actually treated. And it's within that gap that we see standard agricultural practices, like gestation crates. I promise you there are no gory images in this presentation. Like gestation crates. This is the way that nearly all of the breeding pigs in our country, millions upon millions of them, are kept. Not as a temporary holding kennel, but this is permanently 24/7 their existence, lined up like parked cars in cages barely larger than the volume of their bodies. Similarly, nearly all of the eggs produced in our country come from battery cages, where birds are locked in cages so cramped they're unable even to spread their wings. More than 9 out of 10 egg cartons you find in supermarkets in our area and the rest of our country come from these type of facilities. Nearly all of the chickens who we raise for meat have been bred to grow so fast, so obese, that many of them have a difficult time and struggle even to walk more than a few pitiful steps by the end of their abbreviated 6-week lives. These are not anomalies in the meat industry and the egg industry. This is standard industry practice. This is the way that nearly all of the animal products in our country are produced. So, there are a multitude of things that are being done now to try to address this problem, to try to bring consumer expectations of how animals ought to be treated closer into line with how that actual treatment is occurring. In other words, these standard agricultural practices are just so inhumane, they're so extreme, they're just out of step with mainstream American values about how animals ought to be treated. And it's not just mainstream American values. In fact, throughout the world, these practices are being legislated against. In the European Union, all 27 member nations, a body with greater population than that of the United States, has already banned barren battery cages for laying hens and gestation crates for breeding pigs. In Australia, they've also taken similar actions and are moving in that direction. Here in the US, 9 states have now banned gestation crates. A few have banned battery cages with pretty lengthy phase-outs, but still, they're moving in the right direction. Just north of us in Canada, they've just about a month ago promulgated draft regulations to phase out gestation crates from their pork industry as well. But in addition to these public policies, we're now seeing some of the biggest brands starting to pay attention in a modest way, admittedly, to animal welfare. Every logo you see on the screen right now in the last 18 months has announced that they are going to require, for example, their pig suppliers to stop using gestation crates. Now, many of them have very lengthy phase-outs, some of them 10-year-long phase-outs, but at least the issue is being paid attention to. The result of their demand is that many pig producers are now changing the way that they treat their pigs. They're improving their animal welfare, as reported in this Omaha World Herald study. So, how is anybody going to know how these animals are actually being treated? Who's monitoring the treatment of these animals? There's a dizzying array of these labels in the marketplace, seeking to assure consumers that their animal products were raised in a sustainable manner. And during Q&A, I don't have enough time during this talk to tell you what each one of these does or doesn't mean, but during Q&A, I hope we can get into that a bit. But the various logos that people find in the marketplace have all types of meanings. Some of them, for example, like the United Egg Producers logo over here, that's on 90% of the eggs that are produced for show egg purposes in this country. That means basically the birds were locked in battery cages. So a consumer who sees that, say produced in compliance with the UEP's animal husbandry guidelines, might think, wow, that's really a good certification, when in reality it could have meant that the birds had literally less space than this sheet of paper per bird to live on for more than a year prior to slaughter. Alternatively, they could be looking at one of the more higher welfare programs like the Animal Welfare Approved logo, which has perhaps the highest of all these standards. But the point is that there's a whole wide array of these type of claims that are made on animal product packaging. Some of them mean quite a lot. Some of them mean very little. In the case of the pig industry, when they say that they're getting rid of gestation crates, this is the type of system they're moving to. Is it an improvement? Of course. Imagine never being able to turn around for your entire life. Of course, these pigs have a better quality of life than being in an Iron Maiden for their whole lives. But is it what most people think of when they think of high animal welfare standards? Animals who have no bedding, who don't go outside? Probably not. But, of course, it's an improvement. Or with these egg companies that are going to cage-free eggs. This is what a typical cage-free egg facility looks like. An improvement from battery cages? Absolutely, no doubt. These birds are able to walk around, lay their eggs in nests, perch, and so on, but they don't go outside. And they're probably not going to have as good of a life as birds who are out on pasture. Speaking of pasture, just seeing a pasture label doesn't even ensure that the consumer is getting what they're really expecting. You could have sometimes you'll see people misleadingly make these claims of free-range access when you could have a barn like this. This is a typical broiler shed, maybe 30 to 50,000 animals who really don't go outside, but if they have a slight amount of access to the outdoors, not even going outdoors, but just access to the outdoors, they could be labeled as free-range. Or if they're out on pasture, they could be like this, using typical strains of broilers who grow extremely fast, who have the same type of leg problems that conventionally raised broilers have. And yes, they're out on pasture. Yes, they get rotated around. But is that what most people think of? I mean, I think when people think about pasture, they're probably thinking more about something like this. And of course, that exists. That isn't just somebody's backyard hens. This actually exists. In fact, you're going to be hearing from Forrest in a few minutes about his farm, which keeps their animals out truly on pasture. So, how do we get there? How do we get to a system in which we don't have billions upon billions upon billions of animals who are suffering their entire lives on factory farms in conditions that would literally be criminal if the victims were dogs or cats, but yet they're legal because they're chickens and pigs. Well, if you look at the rate of animal raising in our country, we raised in 2012 about 9 billion animals for food, not including aquatic animals, just land animals alone. About 9 billion animals in the United States for food. And more than 9 out of 10 of them were not on pasture. They were in factory farms. If all of them were living like this, like they are on Forest Farm, maybe the situation wouldn't be so dire. But they're not. They're living instead like this on these factory farms. In fact, the percentage of animal products that come from truly pasture-based systems is about that. In fact, I had to enlarge that a little bit just to make it perceptible for you all. So let's just say that we wanted to expand the pasture-based market by 500%, a huge increase that many would say, oh, that's not realistic in the short term, but let's just say a 500% increase in the pasture-based market, that's what it would look like. The rest of it, all from factory farms, from animals who probably didn't step foot outdoors prior to getting onto a slaughter-bound truck. The point of this is that, yes, we need more farmers. Yes, we need more people taking care of animals. We need more pasture-based systems. Family farmers are getting the short end of the stick time and time again. But just supporting them is not sufficient. We have to couple it with eating a saner, more sustainable, more plant-based diet. So for example, going back to Technomic, just about 10 or so days ago, they put out a news survey saying that consumers want to see more vegetables on the menu. In fact, they said that total menu incidences of restaurants in the United States of vegetables has increased over 11% in the past 3 years. Good news, of course. Americans want more vegetables. Who would have ever thought? And in fact, when we look at this, in the last few years, the first ever time that we've seen an increase in small farmers, or in farmers in our country. If you look since World War II to the present, the number of farmers has gone down and down and down until just about 5 or so years ago, and finally it started going back up. Is it coincidence that we're seeing these trends correlate? Maybe it's not causally related, but the point is we are seeing that. So one good thing that we're seeing is that as Americans eat more fruits and more vegetables, we know that it's with good reason. This will not be news to you all, but according to the American Institute for Cancer Research, they say when it comes to American health, the research shows one thing very clearly. We all need to eat more plants and less meat. They're not saying to eat no meat. Of course, if you want to do that, good for you. But what they're saying is we need to be eating more plants and less meat. AARP says cutting back even a little on your meat can lengthen your life. Kaiser Permanente, the health insurance giant, says that the future of healthcare will involve an evolution not of a pill or a surgical procedure, but on another serving of fruits and vegetables. Anyone up for a Teaism vegetable bento box? I might go over and get one myself after this, because what you guys are eating smells really good, and I think I would like to get one. Point is that whether it's campaigns like Meatless Mondays, which are increasing in popularity every day, or you mentioned Mark Bittman with his new best-selling book, Vegan Before 6, in which he advocates eating plants only for the first 2/3 of the day, or whether people want to do, instead of Meatless Mondays, Tofu Tuesdays, who knows? Whatever people want to do, the point is that it makes sense in order to improve agricultural sustainability, in order to improve the environment, in order to improve public health, and certainly to improve the lives of animals. We should be eating more plants and less meat. So, who invented Meatless Monday? Anybody know? Mario Batali. Okay, that's one guess. Great chef. Anybody know? Compassionate Killing. Good guess. Great group, but no. Johns Hopkins. Third guess. All right, I'm going to stop making you guys guess. 3 for 3. It was actually the U.S. government. During World War I, as a resource-saving measure, to try to help the war effort, they encouraged Americans to go meatless on Mondays. It was brought up again during World War II, and then after World War II, in the first ever televised presidential address to the nation, you can see here the front cover of the New York Times, October 1947, Truman calls on nation to forgo meat Tuesdays, poultry, eggs Thursdays as a way to try to help the European rebuilding effort that America was then engaged in after World War II. Meatless Mondays now was resurrected in 2003, yes, by Johns Hopkins School of Public Health. You are absolutely right. And, excuse me, this time, not as a war in some European theater, but rather this time as a war on heart disease, a war on type 2 diabetes, a war on climate change and obesity, and with good reason. In fact, the United Nations says that we need to eat less meat to save the planet. Researchers warn, saying that scientists warn we Westerners need to cut half the meat out of our diets to prevent global warming. According to the United Nations, animal agriculture, as it's currently practiced, is a leading cause, if not the leading cause, of global climate change. Estimates range anywhere from 15 to 18 to even 51%, depending on whose analysis you're looking at, of climate changing gases coming from the meat, egg, and dairy sector. The issue is so serious that Environmental Defense Fund says that if every American skipped just one meal of chicken per week, not even a meatless Monday, just a 1/21st reduction, and substituted it with vegetables, it would be the carbon dioxide savings equivalent of taking more than 500,000 cars off of U.S. roads. The situation is so clear that entire public school districts across the country are implementing entirely meat-free Mondays, like in Detroit or Florida's Broward County or LA Unified in Los Angeles, the second biggest school district in the entire country, serving 650,000 meals every single day, is now entirely meat-free, exclusively vegetarian on Mondays. The trends are so clear of what we need to do, and we're seeing positive movement thanks in large part to innovative, pioneering chefs who are both improving animal welfare for the animal products they are serving and increasing the amount of plants they're serving while reducing the amount of meat. The way that we farm and the way that we feed ourselves is not how we do it, is not how we did it 25 years ago, and 25 years from now, it's not going to be the same. That change is not going to be positive in some self-executing manner. It's only going to be positive if those of you who are chefs and other leaders in the food movement are going to make sure that those changes that we see in the coming decades are going to be actually positive for all of us on this planet, both human and non-human alike. Thank you very much. I'm grateful to have an audience with you all, and I look forward to Q&A.